Runner: The Death Cure is directed by Wes Ball, and it stars Dylan O'Brien, Thomas Brody Sangster, and a bunch of other people. Can't remember the names of the other people, don't blame me, I'm sorry. And this is the third and final installment into the Maze Runner trilogy, because we had the first Maze Runner and then we had Scorch Trials in 2015, and this movie is the third movie, and luckily it isn't split into 2 books. This is just one movie. One finale to this trilogy. Like, can you believe it? Since when does that happen? Like, it never happens anymore that we just get a final installment that's one movie and not split into 2. It is about the characters, that they have to go to this big heist thing, basically, and I don't really want to say anything else. The characters I put through the ringer even more than they were in the other 2 in this movie, and they have all the most interesting stuff going on in this particular Maze Runner movie. So guys, if you want my thoughts on the other 2 Maze Runner movies, I liked the first one actually. I thought it was a fun movie. I was actually interested in the concept. It was the best part about Maze Runner was the concept and the story. That was always my favorite part about that movie, like the whole maze and how you have to find a way to get out of it, and the whole question about why this happened and why there's all these people put in this maze that get their mind wiped. I always found that really interesting, and my main problem with Maze Runner is that the answers at the end didn't really pay off. It was just kind of like, okay, that's kind of a lame answer to everything. And then Scorch Trials I found to be a very forgettable, bland movie where nothing really of interest happened. Like, it was just kind of like this movie where they all hung out in the desert and there was zombies and some people died that you didn't care about, and it was just like, okay. Like, I like these characters too. Like, I like Thomas, I like the main character, I like Thomas Brody Sangster's character, I also like Teresa's character, like Teresa herself, the character. I like all the characters, so I wanted to see a good movie with them, but Scorch Trials just wasn't interesting to me at all. I did a review about it back in the day, and it's like so forgettable that I can't really remember all the reasons why I wasn't a fan of it. But I'm sure if I watch it again, I'd remember, because it is a very forgettable movie. Like, I don't remember a thing about it. So going into this movie, I was just kind of worried that it would be another Scorch Trials. Like, this would just be another movie that was just like Scorch Trials, basically. But I actually enjoyed Death Cure quite a bit. I thought this was actually a really fun, well-made movie. Like, this is much better than Scorch Trials. This is such a step up from Scorch Trials. I don't think I've ever seen a movie that's in a franchise that's like part of a franchise which the previous one wasn't very good, and then the next one step up as much as this did. Because usually when a franchise goes down, the other films start going down too. Like, you've seen it in many franchises that's just happened. Like, they just keep going downhill after that one bad one. But Maze Runner didn't do that. I actually think Death Cure is probably the best young adult adaptation I've seen since probably Fallen Our Stars. I actually found this to be a really fun movie. And the thing that really sells Death Cure for me is the characters, because the characters go through the most interesting arcs that they ever have in the other 3 movies. Like, they're the most interesting that they have been ever. Thomas is going through problems because the person that he was in love with kind of just betrayed the team, and he has to do something involving her. And he hates that he has to do that. Thomas Brody Sangster has his own thing that he's dealing with. Like, I don't want to spoil anything if you haven't seen it, but he has his own thing that he's dealing with. You got Teresa, who's dealing with being on the bad guy side and thinking that it's the right thing to do, while you're betraying some of your friends that helped you out so much. All the characters have the best arcs and the best storylines in this one, and that's what made me really interested in this movie. I was honestly surprised consistently with Death Cure. There are a lot of directions that this movie takes that I didn't expect, and it was really cool. Like, there's a lot of young adult novel adaptation movies that I kind of hate, like Twilight and The Fifth Wave and the Divergent movies. A lot of them are really bad. It's probably my least favorite genre. So going into Death Cure, one of the things I was really worried about is that it would end up like The Hunger Games, where the ending was so disappointing. Like, the first 2 movies are actually pretty solid, and then the next 2 are just really disappointing and not good at all. I was worried that Death Cure would do that, but Death Cure takes the Mockingjay movies and just goes, screw you, because it is so much better than those Mockingjay movies. And I haven't read a single one of the books, and I haven't even seen the trailers, so I found myself consistently surprised in this movie. If maybe you've seen the trailers, maybe you're gonna find things predictable, but I found myself pleasantly surprised throughout this movie. There are a lot of directions and things that it does that surprise me. And that's hard for a movie like this to do, because young adult novel adaptations don't usually surprise me. They're just kind of like, yeah, there's a love triangle, there's teens, they're doing a thing against the government, yeah, that's a movie. The acting across the board is really good, and the action scenes are really good too. This movie is basically one big action scene, sort of, and I didn't mind that. It is one huge heist that they have to go on, and I really enjoyed it. There is some action stuff that's really over the top, but mostly I found it to be really enjoyable. I felt like a lot of the action in this movie that was really inspired by like Star Wars, where they have to like go in and disguise as the bad guys and try to like infiltrate this place. I found it really reminiscent of like a Star Wars thing, if you know what I'm saying. And a lot of it was really well made and really entertaining. That's the thing I can really say about Death Cure. This movie is really entertaining. It's not like the most revolutionary movie that has like the best cinematography or best acting or best anything. Like, it doesn't have like a plot that's gonna be like, oh my goodness, that's the best plot I've ever seen, best screenplay. But out of these types of movies, like young adult novel movies, all I really want to see is really good characters. I want to see really good action. I want to see a really satisfying ending and some surprises here and there, and that's what Death Cure gave me. It's not a perfect movie. It's far from a perfect movie, actually. There's a lot of action that is so ridiculous that it's just kind of like, oh my goodness, this isn't like believable at all. Like, there's a lot of moments where the bad guys are straight up idiots. Like, they don't shoot when they're supposed to. There's this one scene where a truck is being like rammed into these guys, and like it's going straight for these guys, and instead of running away from the truck to save their lives, they just kind of sit there going like this. There's a lot of moments like that in this movie where the bad guys could have shot or done something and then they don't do it. And there's a lot of ex machina too, you know, when like the last second the characters are about to die and then they get saved by something. It happens a lot in this movie. Like, that's very common here. And then there's another sequence with like a plane that didn't really make much sense, and then a scene with a pool, and then a scene with a bus that does something really ridiculous and it doesn't make sense at all. There is moments throughout this movie where the action doesn't work. It's way too over the top and way too insane. And there's still some characters that I didn't really care for, like the old chick that like ran the bad guy government thing. I was never really a fan of her in the other movies, and I'm not a fan of her here. She's just kind of boring and uninteresting. But the thing is with this movie is that it actually made the character that I really didn't like from the last movie, the villain, the Game of Thrones guy, I found him to be much more interesting here than he was in the last movie. He had so much more things to do here. And a large part of this plot also revolves around them trying to save the Asian dude who got taken away in the last movie, Scorch Trials. He got taken away by the bad guys, and a lot of the movie revolves around them trying to save him. And it's like, I didn't really know this character at all from the other two movies. I mean, I knew who he was, but he wasn't really developed at all. So I didn't really care that much about that whole side of the story. I cared more about what the characters were going through, and I cared more about the whole Death Cure thing. I didn't care so much for that guy, and if he died, I wouldn't really have cared that much either. Maybe he gets more developed in the book, but in these movies, he never really was developed enough for me to actually care about him getting out of this movie safely. And then there's also like this emotional confrontation that happens between two characters. Like, two characters get together and they haven't seen each other for a while, and they have this emotional confrontation because of something that happened between them in the past. And then that kind of just gets forgotten about, and it doesn't really come up ever again. It reminded me of Return of the Jedi, when Han and Lando see each other again, and they're just kind of like, hey, how's it going? Even though, like, he betrayed you in the last movie. Like it just kind of glossed over what could have been an emotional confrontation between these characters. And they just kind of, like, decided to push it aside for other things. I would have liked to see more of that emotional confrontation instead of it just being glossed over. And that's the thing about Death Cure. It has the most interesting character arcs of the three movies, and it makes characters more interesting than they were before. Every character in this movie is made more interesting. And that's something that I really enjoyed about Death Cure. Death Cure is not a groundbreaking movie. It's not a movie that's going to go down as one of the best movies of 2018. This is just a really fun movie that's really entertaining, and as far as these movies go, that's what I like to see. I like to see a really fun, entertaining movie that has some surprises here and there, and has some stuff that's really enjoyable. I'm gonna give Maze Runner: The Death Cure a B. It's a solid movie. Like, I'd say if you want to see a solid young adult novel trilogy, you can check these out. Like, Maze Runner is a really intriguing movie. So, my damn camera ran out of battery while I was filming, so I'm just gonna finish what I was saying this way. What I was saying was, it's a solid trilogy, it's a solid enjoyable trilogy. Like, the first one is really intriguing, and then the Scorch Trials is just like that middle thing that you just kind of have to get through, and it feels more like a chore than an enjoyment thing. But then Death Cure is a really solid movie that's really enjoyable. So yeah, I'd say check it out if you want to. And I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.
Was he slow? No. Good kid. Devil behind the wheel. Was he slow? Retarded means slow. Was he slow? No. What the hell else more do you need to know? Devil behind the wheel. Retarded means slow. Was he slow? No. Was he slow?